What's up, everyone? Aslam Duto here, and today I am sitting with Jerry from Ice Media, and he's been in the advertising game for a very long time. And I had a meeting with him a few weeks ago, and he mentioned to me that they also do television advertising in a big way. I was quite surprised because I thought television or advertising your business on television was one of those things that, number one, was reserved for people who had a lot of money or businesses who had a lot of money. And I also thought it was something that was sort of dying out because we're moving into a world of online media and online advertising. But according to Jerry, who's been in the game for how many years is it now?
So I've been actively involved, so I started working at Procter & Gamble, so this would be 17 years now.
17 years. So in 17 years, you're saying even right now, television is still one of the best medias to advertise your business. So we're going to speak to Jerry about, if you are someone who owns a business, how do you actually, what are the things you need to consider and know before considering doing advertising your business on television? What is the potential budget? What could you expect when you speak to a company? So we're just going to be covering some of that and some other questions in between as well. But I think to kick off, Jerry, thanks for coming onto the show.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Okay, and I think maybe let's start off by just, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you started, how you got into advertising. Was that what you planned to do when you were in school?
Yeah. Okay, sure. Thanks, Aslam. So my background in history in the industry is that I, like all good Indian boys, wanted to study something medically related because accounting and law didn't really appeal to me. So at the conclusion of my studies, I tried to get into medicine, that didn't work out. Went to business school, did a postgraduate diploma in business management, and then started doing working well. So did an internship, was fortunate to do an internship at Unilever down in Durban.
Right.
And they offered me a full-time job, but down in Durban, so I declined that. But at Unilever, they mentioned one of their global competitors, which was Procter & Gamble, P&G. So again, P&G is a company that not many people know by name, but they know the brands. So Gillette, Pampers, Head & Shoulders,
Right.
Pantene, etc.
Okay.
And I was fortunate enough to get a role as a procurement manager within media and marketing.
Okay.
So that's where it all started for me. And I spent almost 10 years over there at P&G. I left, got headhunted to join Publicis, which is a multinational French media agency. I spent 2.5 years over there, working again predominantly on the commercial aspects of media and marketing. And when I left there, I joined and I started Ice Media in collaboration with B&B, which is a holding company that we have. And that's basically where I am at this current point in time.
Okay.
And what we focus on, very simply, is so you have traditional media and you have digital media, so online media. And the world, yes, is moving rapidly towards online mediums, online digital mediums. But traditional media still has its role to play, right? It's still the most trusted mediums when it comes to marketing and advertising, because people tend to trust what they see on television, or they tend to trust what the radio DJ has said more than any other medium, right? So traditional media basically has 5 elements. You've got television, you've got radio, you've got billboards out of home, and you've had newspapers and magazines. Unfortunately, newspapers and magazines, I don't know when's the last time you've read newspapers and magazines, but they tend to have migrated much more rapidly onto the online. Right. But TV, radio, and billboards are still there. You drive around anywhere in Johannesburg or anywhere in South Africa for that matter, no doubt you would see a billboard. Sometimes it's in your subconscious that you go and you drive past billboards and you don't even notice that they're there, but they have delivered their message through to you, right?
Okay.
Radio, majority of people who drive in their vehicles listen to some form of radio, right? Even the most music-friendly stations, think of Metro FM, 5FM, East Coast Radio, they thrive on the commercial aspect. So advertisers and brands want to be on those radio stations because, again, it's the reach that they deliver for, or the amount of people that listen to those radio stations. And the last one, and the biggest one, is obviously television, right? as much as people are moving towards streaming platforms, right? Predominantly, people still watch television. As a family, people would sit down and watch television. I know those trends are changing, right? But there's a reason why television series or television programs such as Generations, Muvango, Scheme Sum, back in the day it used to be Isidingo, Silvandalan. Those were the most watched television programs week in, week out by audiences in South Africa, right?
Okay.
And there's also a reason why, so a lot of people globally look at what is the most expensive spot on advertising that you can get, and that's halftime in the Super Bowl in the United States.
Yes, I
right?
think we just had it like a day or two ago, right?
Correct, right? So that still attracts sort of the highest advertising rates that you would find anywhere in the world. But people are watching, and that's why those mediums, so TV, right, attracts that premium or attracts those rates. It's because people are watching, right?
Okay. Maybe let's just pause there for a moment, right? So you mentioned quite a lot. Firstly, I was going to ask you, what is traditional media? I think you covered that, which is your big three. Obviously, it's television, it's radio, it's billboards.
Yep.
Right? Those are the three. So we're going to focus today on television. Now, a lot of people believe that television is reserved for big brands, big companies that have massive budgets. I once owned a fast food franchise, and I remember us being told in a meeting that if you want to advertise on television, you need R1 million. That's one of the things I heard. But when I met with you a few weeks ago, you sort of changed that perspective, and I was quite surprised because I thought, well, that means almost anyone can advertise. So I think maybe let's cover what is your feeling in terms of which companies, and this is a broad question, but just answer it the best you can. Which companies do you think are at the right time in their growth phase to start advertising on television? Because some people might be thinking, it's too soon for me, I don't have the budget. Then you get maybe that middle level company, and you're getting a company that's doing very well.
Sure.
Right? So we don't speak about the company doing very well right now. We want to speak about the bottom two. At what stage in your mind is a company ready to advertise on television?
Sure. Okay. Great question. So I think just to give some context, right? Back in the day, in South Africa specifically, you would have had your national broadcasters. You would have had whatever the precursor to SABC 1, 2, and 3 was, right? You would have had ETV as a standalone channel, and then you would have had Ahemd. Ahemd would have been for the upper end of society,
yes,
right? With the proliferation of media, right, and the proliferation of the television stations, right? So basically now, DSTV, you have 300 channels, right? E-media doesn't only consist of ETV, right? So you've got that set-top box that ETV will give you as an example, and then you have multiple channels on e-media as well, right? The same with SABC, right? So what that means is that there are many more channels, right, appealing to a much more diverse target market, right? And the simple economics of it is that the more channels you have, right, the cheaper the rate has to be.
Okay.
Right.
Supply and demand, basically.
So exactly, supply and demand, right? So you no longer have to be one of those big media, big conglomerates to be able to afford to advertise in television, right? To answer your question directly, what does television media provide you to, right? And predominantly you look at three elements, right? So you look at awareness, brand education, and call to action, right? So you call it ABC, right? Awareness, brand education, and a call to action. So you want your target market, whoever it may be, to understand who it is that you are, right? So the second element is what is it that you offer, right? And the third one is why should a consumer buy your product or your service, right? So that's the ABC. So if you just keep it very simple. Now, the key question then is that who are your target market, right? If you're looking at mass market, right, and you're looking at selling a product such as diapers or sugar or rice, for example, then you want to attract the target market, right? But if you're selling something high end, right?
That you mean the mass market.
The mass market, right? Exactly. You go after, because you want to build reach, right? You want to build reach. You want as many people as possible to be aware that you are selling this product or service, right? You want to educate them to say that this is what the product entails, and then the call to action element is I'm different from the other brands because of ABC, or because this is my unique service offering, right? Or because I'm cheaper than everyone else, whatever it is, right? Then you have products who are on the other end of the scale, which is high-end luxury watches, for example, or luxury car brands, right? They don't want to appeal to everybody because they want to have that aspirational element to them.
Right.
And they would therefore advertise on television, but on stations or on programming that is relevant to that, or is in tune with that target market.
Right.
Simple example, a tag here watch would go and be on Ahemd as an example, or would be on one of the super sport channels, right? Because again, the inherent understanding is that, or the expectation is that, where do I speak to my target market? What is my target market watching? And therefore, where is the easiest place to find them, right? On which channels would be easiest to find them? And the television stations do a fantastic job of this, right? They would be able to really hone down and tell you, based on what your target market is, which television stations, which specific channels would work for you, right?
Okay.
And then to close up on your question, what is the right time for a budding enterprise or a young entrepreneur to find himself on television, right? So the answer to that would be as soon as possible, right? What's the minimum time period? No, you don't need $1 million, right? If you are smart enough and you understand your target market well enough, you could spend, less than half of that, and you would be able to get a meaningful, impactful media campaign on television. And again, it doesn't need to break the bank, right? Because like I said, on the DSCB bouquet, for example, there are so many channels that speak to such a diverse range of target population, right? That you will be able to specify and target in and zone in on the target market that's right, or that you're trying to get for your product or service.
I think you mentioned something very, very important, which speaks to this cost element that we're touching on. And it's something I've read in marketing books. One of the first things they always tell you is, who is your niche? Who's your target market? And if I'm listening to what you just said, essentially, if you want to get the most bang for your buck, you don't want to potentially be on the big channels where the mass is. You want to identify who is my target market, number one. Like you said, what are they watching? And then find the channels that sort of attract that audience. So if it's for example kids, if it's kids that you're trying to target, you will then obviously go to like, I don't watch the kids channel. Then you go to a kiddies channel, and what you're saying is the more niche the channel is, the cheaper the rate probably will be.
Sure. Just to check in there. So Advertising Standards Authority, you're not allowed to advertise to kids, right?
Oh, okay.
But anyway, yeah. So again, to allay this misconception that TV advertising is beyond my means and it's beyond my capacity. Back in the day, the inherent understanding would be that if I want to create an advert, I need to have a director, a crew, have this old rental setup where I've got lights, camera, action, and I'm shooting this wonderful ad in downtown Johannesburg for my car brand. With advancements in technology, you can shoot an A-grade advert using an iPhone, right?
Wow.
So the cost of production of your TV advert has gone phenomenally down, right?
Okay.
Because it's become more commoditized, it's cheaper, it's easier. With the introduction of AI now, that's even further reduced the amount of brain power that's required, right? And the amount of people and resources that you need to put in to creating an advert, right? So that's the first element, right? Creating a compelling call to action, which is your advert, right? That's the first element, right? The second element is now, again, the same trail of thought that we were on now, that it doesn't necessarily need to cost you an arm and a leg to advertise, because marketing is no longer a spray and pay approach, right? With digital mediums or digital media, right? You speak to specific target populations, right? And that's no different to TV now, right? So if you want to speak to a specific target population, there's no need for you to go on a spray and play approach and aim for the best, have an advert in Siebendelaan, right? Or an advert in Isidingo, right? When you're trying to sell something that the people who watch Isidingo, Siebendelaan or Generations wouldn't necessarily inquire, right? So it's become it's become a lot more scientific. A, it's become cheaper, right? And B, it's become a lot more scientific, so that bang for your buck, as you mentioned, it is what gives you the best chance of reaching and speaking to those people that you want to sell your product and service to, right? And there's a lot of science that's been put in behind that, right? And the summary of which is you don't need to spend exorbitant amount of money, right, to be able to get your message and your branding out to people that you want to buy your service product.
I think I've got an idea of where I'd like to take this conversation, because you're speaking about production. So I guess my question now is the person that wants to put the business owner, because a business owner tends to know his business. He doesn't necessarily know how to advertise the business. Sure. Do companies like what you guys do companies like yours typically give them direction and say, look, this is what we need from you, this is all we need from you, and then the rest we'll give you proposals in terms of what will work for your brand and your target market?
Yeah. So what is key, right, from a business owner or potential advertiser, right, is they need to understand and they need to be able to give a full-on explanation of what their product or service offering is. That's the first element. So they need to understand what it is that they're offering. And the second element is they need to understand who they want to target. Right? So if they have this understanding, right, and these are the two elements, right, it makes our life and our job much easier, right? Because then from a medium point of view, so remember you have, and this is how we will work in an agency world, right? You have the strategy, right? What is the strategy? What is the product? Who is the product targeted at? What is the pricing of the product, etc. Once you understand what the strategy is, you then move into implementation planning, right? So the implementation phase is basically we take the strategy and we bring it to life, right? So in order for us to reach this target market, we need to do A, B, and C. So a typical example, we need to spend money on television, we need to spend money on billboards, we need to spend money on digital, right? That's the implementation plan, right? And once we have that implementation plan, of which we provide the input and we provide the guidance as well, right? Thereafter comes the execution. And the execution is basically, let's go and negotiate with A, B, and C television station, A, B, and C digital content provider, right? So that we can get our product based on our plan in front of the target market.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Tell me, what is the typical time frame that you normally advise people to advertise for? Because, and I think I want you to cover two things here. Because you can see an ad that runs for 10 seconds. It's there and it's gone like really quickly. And then you could see an ad that's on there for like 30 seconds. Obviously the 30-second ad is going to cost you a lot more. But if you're doing a 30-second ad or a 10-second ad, what is the frequency with which it needs to run? So let's maybe first speak about the duration of actual ad or video. And then let's speak to frequency. How often do you want it to be playing, ideally per day? And then in terms of time period that it's on air, how long should that be ideally in your mind?
Yeah, so the short answer to that is it depends, and I know it's not an answer that you would like, right? But let's discuss the various mediums and keep it TV specifically, right? So your traditional spot, they call it a spot, right, is your 30-second ad. Right? So if you were watching the news, right, and then you went to an ad break, right, you would have, in the South African context, majority of the time, 6 adverts, each of 30 seconds, which gives you the 3 minutes, right? So 30 seconds is typically your traditional ad, right? However, if you wanted to be more craftier and you wanted more frequency, right, you could cut down your ad to a 20-second ad or to a 10-second ad, right? And then that obviously it costs you less, but you have the ability of placing it more frequently, right? Then you also have this thing called squeeze backs, right? So where the screen gets smaller and then you have the branding that comes on. So if you watch football or cricket or whatever sporting activity, you'd find that a lot of the brands, and that's typically the headline sponsor that is doing that, right? Then you have these you know, at the bottom of the screen, you have the scrolls that go past whilst you're watching something, right? That's another advertising medium on television that is available. And then you have product sponsorships or program sponsorships, right? So you would find, and again, going back to the sporting examples, the leagues in our country are sponsored by a headline sponsor. And whilst you're watching that content, you would find that the sponsor's logo is there in the top right hand corner, and you would find the sponsor's messaging that comes ever so frequently, right? So there are various mediums or various options when it comes to advertising in television, right? Question you ask, and why I say it depends is because, remember, you have an ad, the ad has a cost to it, right? Every time you play the ad again, there's a follow-up cost to that, right? So why I'm saying it depends is how much does your budget allow, right? And how much of the target population you want to reach, how many times. So reach is a very simple function, right? So reach means what percentage of your population do you want them to see the advert, right? And the frequency is how often do you want them to see the advert, right? And the human psychology is such that you see something for the first time, yes, you take notice of it, right? If you see the same thing for the 8th time, you already know what it's all about, right? It's already built into your subconscious, right? You don't even have to see, you don't even have to hear what they say. You already have associated that brand with the product or service that's offering if you've seen it often enough, right? And that basically is the two elements which determine, right? So reach and frequency determine how long you want to be on air for and how much you are willing to spend, right? And again, that's a discussion that a business owner has to take. But those are the two primary elements, right? Is basically your reach and your frequency. You basically want to build awareness, going back to the ABCs. You want to build awareness of your brand or your service, right? You want to educate the consumer of what is you're offering, and you want them, call to action, you want them to come and engage with your product or your service, right? Which is ask you to buy the thing or engage with the service.
Okay, got it. Maybe give us an idea of the typical process. I don't know if you want to boil it down to 3 steps or 5 steps. What's the typical process when someone approaches an agency and says, look, here's my brand. I'm already understanding. I'm going to get to this in the next question. Speaking more about that target market, because I'm starting to think by the time you speak to an ad agency, you need to have narrowed down who your target market is. You must have done that market research, because you will not know who they are and where to find them if you haven't done the research, right? So in terms of the steps that you now take, once someone comes to you and they say, right, I've done the research, here it is, what are the steps that then happen from the time you engage with that customer to the time they're now watching the television and they see my ad is on TV?
Look, typically it can be as little as 2 weeks, right?
Okay.
It can be, you can create a production, create an advert, and 2 weeks later it can be on SABC, right? Provided they have space, right? They have space. But typically, right? Again, if everything is done according to plan, and the strategy is what leads this entire process, right? I would say realistically about 2 months, right? 2 months from the start of planning to have an advert, right? Understanding who your target market is, right? To producing the advert, to having an implementation plan of these are the channels that I want to be on, to actually executing and being on those channels. Typically, we would work on a 2-month basis, right? 2 months prior, right? So prior to you going on air, this entire process would start 2 months in advance, right? Majority of the broadcasters in South Africa have incentivized advertisers to book early, because remember, you only have a finite number of spots that are available to advertise on.
In a given year, right?
In a given day, in a given week, in a given month, right? Advertising also is seasonal, right? So you would find in January, in February, a typical example would be the back to school specials that you would find on television, right? Come March, April, May, then you would find a lot of winter related specials, right? If the advertiser was in that market. come towards the end of the year, then you have more summer-related specials, more holiday-related specials, whatever it may be. And then there's big events, right? So if there's a World Cup that's happening, or there's a big national event that's happening, that also, determines whether there's space available prior to those events for advertising purposes, right?
Okay.
So that's why the encouragement is always advertise or get your strategy done so that you have sort of a conversational calendar for the year, right? So you need to know which are your months that you want to target, right? Where your target market will be most receptive to buying your service or your product.
Okay.
Right? So to answer your question directly, it can be, again, in an ideal situation, it can be as little as 2 weeks and you can be on air, right? But ideally, you want to plan in advance, right? And typically the process takes at least 2 months.
2 months. Okay. You're just making me think about something now, because you're speaking about the time when these advertisers, or when's the best time to for example, advertise is obviously when your target market is watching.
Sure.
But I'm getting the idea also that things like cost and frequency are also going to come down to the time of day that you're actually being aired, because I'm thinking about those infomercials that used to be on television.
9 to 12 in the morning. Yeah.
Yes, and I would imagine no one is really watching television at that time of day.
Housewives are.
Housewives are. Okay, so if someone has a product or a brand that is targeting a housewife, for example, are those types of things still, that they still do things like, for example, infomercials, or how do you determine what's the best time of day for you to advertise? I know you're going to speak about the target market, but someone else might be saying, well, I would love to be in front of generations when it's on, but obviously that slot, I'm sure it's extremely expensive to get a spot there. But if there's other times of day, what in your mind is sort of the best day where you still get to potentially reach that target market, but it can also fit within that budget?
Yeah, so again, you see, it all boils back down to what I've been saying, that it's who your target market is, right? And this is now the conversation we're having on environment, right? So in what environment would you find your target market? Is your target market the one that watches the news, right? Is it the one that watches the soapies? Is it the one that watches late night movies? Are they the ones that watch sport, right? And that's, again, just giving you some broad-based examples, right? If your product or your service is a broom or a mop or a vacuum cleaner or whatever it is, right, then midday works for you, or 10 to 12 in the morning works for you, right? Because that's potentially where the people who would utilize those services are watching.
And is it generally cheaper at that time of day?
Yes, definitely, right?
Okay.
So economies, supply and demand, you have the same thing. You have this element of on advertising, prime time versus shoulder time versus non-prime. So prime versus non-prime, and prime time is typically from say 5 p.m. till about 10 p.m. every night, right?
Okay.
That's when people have completed their work day. They go home. This is when they're making their supper, when they're sitting as a family, when they are interacting with each other, and that typically sometimes also involves watching their favorite television program at the same time, right? So between the hours of 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. broadly, right? And I know viewing patterns are shifting. Now you have pay-per-view or view on demand, right? So Netflix is an example where people, it's no longer an appointment view, right? You watch when you have the time, right? But again, that's not the entire population of South Africa, right? The majority of the population of South Africa still watch traditional television, right? At traditional times, right? And that's basically what determines the cost, right? So the more people that watch a certain program, the higher the rates will be by advertising in the air, or the higher the advertising rates within those programs and within those environments.
Okay. I think maybe let's summarize it like this, and I'm going to make your life a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
Okay. If you had to summarize it, someone comes to you and they say, "Look, I've got a business. I want to advertise on television. Just give me the top 3 things I need to know before I even consider this."
So a good understanding of what is it that you're offering, what's your product, what's your service, right? And if they have a unique selling proposition, all the better, right? That's the first element, right? The second element is who do you want to target with your product or your service, right? So you need to be very clear on who is your target population, right? Because then that determines whether you go on Supersport as an example or SABC One as an example, right? That's the second element. And if the third element, right, it would be good if the business owner, the entrepreneur, whoever wants to be on television, has an idea of what the conversational calendar would be, right? Meaning, in which part of the year do I want to promote my product, right? Because reality is not everybody has the budget to advertise exactly the same throughout the year.
That's very important. Yes,
Right.
right.
You can't have the same advertising budget. Not even the biggest brands have the same advertising budget that stretches across the year, right? Majority of them have the seasonality, right? So you speak to people during different times of the year when they are the most receptive, right? So those are the three elements, right? Know your product or your service. What is it that you are offering? The second element is, do you understand or do you have an idea of who your target market is, right? Because that's very important for which mediums or which channels we would recommend. And then the third one is conversation calendar. So during the course of the year, when do you want to speak to your target market? And ideally, you want to have a budgetary indication as well, right? How much can you afford behind marketing, right? And I know back in the day, I refer to this a lot back in the day, business owners used to see marketing as a grudge expense. Like, what does it provide to me other than, putting out some promotion, and I don't see the income, right? Or I can't necessarily tie back the amount that I put into advertising versus the increase in people walking into my store or asking about my product, right? That perception has changed now, right? Because nowadays you live in a society where if you are not top of mind, right, people will just have the next alternative. People will just utilize the next alternative because there are so many more products, services out there for exactly the same thing, right? Typical example, some of the biggest brands in the world, right? Everybody knows that you get a fizzy drink that's black in color, right? But still, amongst the biggest advertiser is the fizzy drink that is black in color because they continuously want to keep themselves top of your mind awareness. All right? So that when you do get thirsty, you go for that brand as opposed to another black and fizzy soft drink that's blue in color. All right? So if you notice, and this is something that you can potentially notice now when you drive as well, right? Biggest brands in the world, they continuously advertise on billboards, on television, right? Just so that they are in the back of people's minds subconsciously, so that when people are either hungry, you think of a burger brand that is yellow in color or red in color, right? And if you're thirsty, you think of a brand that's black in color, that has a red label, right? So that's what they continuously do, and that's again just keeping their awareness, right? And educating you that they are there, so that brand is always building and brand is always in your mind.
Okay. No, I think that's brilliant advice. Thanks so much for enlightening everyone about how to advertise on television. What are the things that they need to know? If I had to summarize everything, I think one of the most important parts is just understanding a target market, because I think that drives everything. It drives what the cost is going to be of that advertising, because it's driving where you're going to be advertising. If you have a product that's sort of very mass market, you're going to have to be advertising potentially where the mass market is. So I think that target market research is probably one of the most important steps that the business owner needs to take.
100%.
And understanding.
And just to close, I think the one thing that I failed to mention is that, yes, we do work predominantly in traditional media, right? And what does traditional media provide through to the mass market or mass population, right? And I think the one thing that traditional media still has an edge over digital media is this perception or reality, right, of credibility, right? So a brand that is on TV, that is on radio, or that's on a billboard, in the consumer's mind, that brand or that company is a credible brand, a brand that I can trust, right? And so that's a big thing when it comes to people saying I don't really see what the point of advertising on television or billboards are, right? I don't see people coming and buying my service, right? But it's that reality of the perception that it's a credible brand, it's a credible service.
So it's a
right?
trust building exercise.
Of course.
It builds trust in the consumer's mind because they're associated with that credibility.
Yes.
I think that's a good point, and I believe you because I'm very much involved in the digital and online marketing space. And the one thing that I find is people are very skeptical about what they see online versus what they see on television. It's almost like if I see it online, it might be a scam, but if I see it on television, it has to be legitimate. So I think that you're absolutely right in terms of the credibility building on those traditional platforms. Jerry, thanks so much for coming on. I've learned a lot. If you guys do want to make inquiries, I'll just leave some details, email, phone number. If you want to get your brand on television, you can contact or make contact on that number, on that email. And you can speak to Jerry and his team and they'll let you know how you can get your brand on television. Thanks, Jerry. It was nice speaking to you.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Thank you.
Okay.